The Talk Shop.
In Cape Town, broadcasting from the National Research Foundation's Science for Society lecture at the Life Sciences Building at the University of the Western Cape. Well, the National Research Foundation has partnered with the University of the Western Cape and SAFM for its Science for Society lecture, and today's lecture is entitled Human Development, Individual and Society. The idea of human development is in our thinking about ourselves and our society, conscious of our own development as human beings from infancy through to old age, and aware of our history through our families and ancestors and how this influences us. Human development is what we seek to achieve through the betterment of our education, our health systems, infrastructure, governance and social relations. Well, today's lecture, entitled, as I say, Human Development, Individual and Society, is going to explore what human development is and the new science on early childhood development. The lecture is also part of the Centres of Excellence annual forum, marking the 10th anniversary of the Centres of Excellence fundraising instrument. And let me tell you that the Centre for Human Development is one of 5 new Centres of Excellence created by the Department of Science and Technology, National Research Foundation. It's hosted by WITS, and it includes 5 universities and 2 science councils, which is not half bad. But this one is the only Centre of Excellence in the human and social sciences, so it's an honour to be here, and very thrilled we are, and very much looking forward to listening to what our first guest has to say. It's Dr. Desmond. He's an economist and Chief Research Specialist in the Human and Social Development Research Programme at the HSRC. He works primarily on issues related to children in adverse environments, especially HIV-affected families, and on economic evaluation. Areas of research interest include the implications of HIV and AIDS for children, economic evaluation of policy options, and early childhood development, which simply couldn't be more important. He's worked as a research specialist at the FXB Center for Health and Human Rights at Harvard University and the Health Economics and HIV/AIDS Research Division that's heard at the University of Natal. So with no further ado, Dr. Desmond, over to you. Looking forward to what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. This evening I've been given the task of answering the question, what is human development? And it's a task at which I will surely fail, but one that I hope to at least attempt, and in doing so raise some questions. Because I think the question of what is human development is a question which we all should have an opinion on. And I think that is really a theme that I'll take through this. Development is the goal. We see it everywhere, or at least we hear it everywhere. We apparently have a developmental state. We have the National Development Plan. We have the Youth Development Agency. We have the Department of Economic Development. We have the Industrial Development Corporation, the Development Bank of Southern Africa. I can go on. There's a long list of development. The word development is simply everywhere. But what is it? What do we mean by development? In particular, what do we mean by human development? What are we attempting to do? So I'm going to speak this evening inspired by the work of 3 people. Amartya Sen, who's a Nobel Prize-winning economist. Steve Biko, an activist, a thinker, murdered by the apartheid state. And Richter, an activist, a thinker, murdered by the apartheid state. The apartheid state knew well the power of ideas, which is why they murdered those who had ideas that were against theirs. But in thinking about these 3 people that I chose as the ones to focus on, I realized they have 3 wise men and no woman to speak about. I could equally have spoken about Martha Nussbaum, who has similar ideas to Amartya Sen. I could have spoken about Wangari Maathai, who covers environmental issues, on which I will also touch. I could have spoken about Helen Joseph, who in terms of the points which I will raise from Rick Turner had some similar ideas. But I chose 3 men, and that was what I chose, and that's what I'm sticking with. But I had to stop and ask myself, what is it that I've done? We have to be very careful about whose voices are being heard in our discussion about what we say development is. When we talk about human development, we have to think always, who are we talking about? Whose voices are being heard in the discussion? And that really brings me back to the point that we really have to be thinking about both public and private debate. We really need voices from everyone in terms of what is it that we're doing here. What do you want for yourself? What is development to you? What would you say changes in your life? What would those changes be that would be constituting development? What would it be for your family? And what would it be for our society as a collective? What are we trying to do? We have all of these efforts. We have the developmental state. We have all of these other things. Where are we going with all of this? What is the primary goal? And only once we have a sense of what the primary goal is, then we can start to have a discussion about what is the best way to get to that goal. So I want to put my 4 points into that discussion, into that debate. But as I said, this is a debate which needs to be had as a public debate. It needs to be based on individual reflection and public discussion. And these are just the 4 points that I would like to throw in there in terms of my thoughts around what we should be thinking about when talking about human development. I'm going to argue first that we must dream big. I'm then going to talk about how development is not just money, but it's a freedom to choose. I'm going to talk about how true freedom, however, requires more than choice, and how with freedom comes responsibility. So we must dream big. So I want to read a quote to you from Richter, written in 1972. There are two kinds of impossibility: the absolute impossibility and the other things being equal impossibility. It is absolutely impossible to teach a lion to become a vegetarian. Other things being equal, it is impossible for a black person to become Prime Minister of South Africa. So written in 1972, he was making the point that at that time, people would say it is impossible for a black person to be Prime Minister or later to be President of South Africa, because they weren't willing to think of what could change. In that environment, it was not possible, but it was not something which was absolutely impossible. So when we talk about development in South Africa and we say this or this is not possible, we cannot address poverty so quickly, we cannot address the health issues as quickly and as thoroughly as we want, it's simply impossible. Is that absolutely impossible, or is that other things being equally impossible? Are we trying to hold on to certain things which we are not willing to change, or are these things truly that difficult that they cannot be done? So it's important to then say what can be changed. What is this more transformative agenda that we can talk about if we're defining the goal? Because it is the dream and the need to dream big that really defines how we evaluate where we are today relative to that dream, and how we evaluate different futures. If we go in this direction or that direction, is it taking us closer to that dream that we have, that not other things being equal dream, the dream that we have when we're free to think more broadly? The National Development Plan is indeed based on a dream for 2030. It's quite a long, quite poetic dream that they put at the front of the document. I encourage you all to read it. And then read it and ask yourself, do you share that dream? Is that the South Africa that you want to see? We jump very quickly to discussing whether or not the policies of the National Development Plan are the right policies. But we should first be asking are they the right policies, or are we just differing in what we want to see as a society? Do we want to see different things? Therefore, obviously, we disagree with the policies which are trying to take us to somewhere we don't want to go. Or maybe you do agree with the dream, and in which case you're questioning whether those policies are the right policies to get us to that dream. But that is a public debate, and something we need to really interrogate if we are asking, are we really looking at what transformation could look like? What would be a truly developed South Africa? What does that look like? That needs freedom. Freedom to really imagine what it could be. And I'll come back to this point at the end. So I want to put a few of my points in what I think some of that would look like. What would a more developed South Africa look like? So it's not just money. More money is obviously important, but it's not just money. But I would argue that it's the freedom to choose. And this is where I bring in the ideas from Amartya Sen. So the National Development Plan, again, states that it aims to eliminate poverty and reduce inequality. It's already acknowledging in that development plan that it's not just about getting more money. Simply having more is not enough, because then it wouldn't matter who it went to. It wouldn't be about eliminating poverty. It would just be about generating the fastest economic growth that we could have. It's saying that certain people need that money more than others, and that having such huge inequality in the country is not good for our development. That is part of that 2030 dream that the National Development Plan has. And really what it highlights is what it forces you to think about is why is it that certain people need money more than others? And to go back to Amartya Sen, he asks a very important question. Can you define the difference between starving and fasting? The physical difference is that physically they're the same thing. You don't eat. And because you don't eat, your body will become weaker and you will feel the pains of hunger. But they are two completely different things. The difference between starving and fasting is choice. And so while they are the same end, if you choose to fast, you are not the same as someone who does not choose but starves. And really, that is what freedom is about. If you want to fast, fast, but it should be your choice. And really, we should be thinking about development as that freedom to live the life that you would wish to lead. So not trying to define what we think everyone should be doing in the country, but saying that for our country to be truly developed, we need to be thinking about what freedoms do they need? What choices do they have to have open to them to be able to choose to live their life, not the life we want for them, the life that they want for themselves. And this has important implications when compared to a more traditional, narrower definition of development, which is just about money. Certainly, money is important. What is the biggest constraint for many people in the country in terms of having the choices to do what they wish to do is a lack of income. Simply not being able to afford to take the steps that they want for themselves or their family. And that makes reducing poverty a key priority. But what also constrains it, the ability to have a job, the dignity of work, to live the life you choose to live, to be allowed to go out and have a job when you have massive unemployment. That's saying that is taking away a freedom from you. If you choose to stay at home, that is your choice. And that should be a free choice, but not one which is forced upon you by the inability to find work. What does it mean for disability? It suggests that while some people may need certain amounts of income to have free choice, maybe people who are disabled need more income to have the same level of choice, because society is not set up to be prepared for them to live to the same standard of life with a similar income. Maybe they will have to buy additional things, wheelchairs. They may have to encounter more obstacles, and so therefore they will need more. So it's not just about money anymore. It's about a much broader understanding of development as choice, and what does it take to create the choices that people need to live the life that they want. And part of those choices is to have a democratic situation, to be able to choose who leads you. And having a democratic society where we can vote, where we have a free media, we have free access to information is part of development. And when one defines development in that way, any attack on media, on freedom of access to information, cannot be done in the name of protecting other developmental gains that we hope to have. Because if democracy is development, you cannot compromise development in the name of achieving development. Freedom, however, is more than choice. And I want to comment here for a moment on what Steve Biko said. Steve Biko, from the dock in 1976, was talking about how young black South Africans grow up facing an environment where they see everything that is good is white and everything that is bad is black. The school that they go to is bad, it's full of black children. The school that is good is full of white children. And he goes on to say that the homes are different, the streets are different, the lighting is different. So you tend to begin to feel that there is something incomplete in your humanity, and that completeness goes with whiteness. Now, while the environment may have changed over the years, and we have a much more open society than in 1976 when Biko was speaking from the dock, he asked essentially two critical questions. How does the environment in which you grow up and in which you live shape how you see yourself? How does the way in which you see yourself shape how you behave? Race is still an issue. There are still these matters which he spoke about in 1976 which are apparent today, and are we asking how they affect the lives of young black people growing up in a society like that? But are we also asking how that looks for class? When you are poor and you are seeing that all good things go with rich people, but if you are poor and poor people like you must suffer along with bad things, what does that do about you? What happens when you go to a poor school, or when you go to a health centre and you're treated appallingly, when your parents take you to the doctor and the nurses or the doctors speak down to your parents? What does that say to you about yourself? What effect is that having on you? Can we talk about a society being developed in a system where we do that to people? What does it say when you leave work and leave school and face 5 or 10 years of unemployment? What message is that sending to young people? When you live in a society that is violent, what does that message send? What does that tell you about yourself when your peers are affected by violence? What does it say to women who are objectified, who suffer the fear of sexual assault, who may suffer sexual assault themselves? What does that say to them? What does that do to their own self-image? Can we capture this by the word poverty? Is this poverty? Poverty implies a lack of something. You don't have money. What we're talking about here is oppression. And if we're talking about freedom, we need to have the freedom from oppression. But when we talk about oppression, we must understand that there must be an oppressor. Oppression does not come about. When we talk about poverty, we have taken the problem and given it to the poor. When we talk about oppression, we make clear that the problem is a system which oppresses those people. Something makes them oppressed. And when we're talking about development, we have to understand that so that we can remove the oppression so that those people are no longer oppressed. But with freedom comes responsibility. Freedom to choose to live the life you want to live is important and critical. But we also have responsibilities to each other. We cannot call it a developed society when we are going around chasing purely our self-interest. We have to think of those obligations. We have to also think of the obligations to future generations. Are we constraining the choices of those yet to be born? If we damage the environment, if we destroy species, if we lead to climate change by our choices to live the life we choose to live now, then the future generations don't have the choice to go back on that. We've made that choice for them. So in our argument that we are living development by having our choices, but constraining the development of future generations, can we really call that true human development? So in this discussion, I've made 4 points. That development is more than money, it's freedom, it's the freedom to choose. But that freedom must be free of an oppressive society, and that it must be sustainable development so that we can really, truly have a country that we are proud to pass on to our children. But people may say, this is all great, but to go back to Richter's point, they may be saying, well, are you simply building castles in the sky? That you've created this wonderful dream of what you think the country should look like. And sure, the castles in the sky goes back to the famous quote by Henry Thoreau, who says, if you have built castles in the sky, let not your dreams go to waste. Just build the foundations under them. And that is what we have to start to think about. What is the dream that we have? And then let us start thinking about putting the foundations underneath them. Let us think what we can do about that. You think about the country and you think about all the good things that we've had in the last 20 years, and there are many of them. We have a fabulous grant system. We have increased access to electricity, to water, to housing. We have many successes, but we have many failures too. We have an education system that is struggling. We have a healthcare system that is struggling. We have politicians who scream at each other in Parliament. These things do not make you feel necessarily confident about the country. But those, when you think about those, you start to say, this development that you dream of is impossible. But then we are stuck. That is other things being equal, being impossible. Other things do not have to be equal. We do not have to have a failing education system. We do not have to have a struggling health system. We might always have politicians who shout at each other, but maybe we don't have to depend on them as much. And when you start thinking that those things need not be permanent, you start to reflect on what is the potential that we could have. What is the potential that when you think of what could we do as a country if we work together? What could we do if we stopped looking to pull from one to the other? What could we do if we drew together and dreamt of that castle in the sky that we could build to? And when I think like that, I start to think of the real potential that this country has. And when I start to think of that real potential and the possibility of realizing that potential, if you can feel that potential, then you know what human development is, and that's what we should be fighting for. Thank you very much.
Well, that was Dr. Chris Desmond, economist, chief research specialist in the Human and Social Development Research Programme in the Human Sciences Research Council, who's done a great deal of thinking, I would say. I thought that was a really impressive piece of logic and a little bit of thought that, and it's thank you so much, Chris. It was really impressive to hear how one thought flows from another, and interesting, as you say quite rightly, that you chose 3 wise men. One has to say, I wonder how different it would have been had you chosen the women. But nonetheless, we accept that you've chosen a very convincing option. So thank you very much. You're listening to the Talk Shop here on SAFM. We're here broadcasting live from the University of the Western Cape, from the National Research Foundation Science for Society lecture at the Life Sciences building. And I think, as I say, it proves to be a very, very interesting that we have lying ahead. And if that's provoked some thoughts in you, and I'm sure that, like me, there were a lot of questions there that Chris's chat there elicited, certainly for me. So if you have questions and you can feel them coming on, just make a note, because we'll be opening the lines after the news at 8 o'clock, and you can give us a call on 0891 104 207, 0891 104 207. Equally, if you want to pop us an SMS, it's 34701. And we'll be hearing from our audience right here at the University of the Western Cape. But right now, you're listening to the Talk Shop. Stay with us.